Paris, and welcome to Glenmorangie's launch of the 8th private edition Glenmorangie Bacalta. To introduce myself, my name is Brendan McCarron. I am the head of maturing whisky stocks at Glenmorangie, and I'm sat right now in the sensory lab at Glenmorangie, where all of our incredible whiskies are created. And I'm here to talk to you tonight about Glenmorangie Bacalta. But I'm not here alone. In fact, with me is my boss, the man who created this incredible whisky and has responsibility for all Glenmorangie's, Dr. Bill Lumsden. So good evening, Bill.
Thank you very much, Brendan. Good evening, London, Munich and Paris also. It's great to see you all here, and we're going to have fun tasting the new private edition range tonight, I think.
So just before we begin tasting, just a little bit of housekeeping. The plan, if Bill and I can stick to time, which isn't a guarantee, is we're going to talk for about 30 minutes just to bring to life this incredible whisky, which of course we're both really excited about, and Glenmorangie as a whole. After the 30 minutes, when you've had an opportunity to try this whisky, everyone, so London, Munich and Paris, will all get an opportunity to ask questions of Bill about his inspiration or anything else around this amazing whisky. So if that makes sense, probably it's time to begin, Bill. So can you tell us a little bit about Glenmorangie Bacalta?
Absolutely, Brendan. Well, the first thing I would say is the name, in common with the rest of the Glenmorangie private edition range, is a Scottish Gaelic word, and Bacalta means baked. And for those of you who are familiar with Madeira wine, you probably know where I'm going with this, that Madeira wines get their unique character from being baked in the sunshine on the island of Madeira. So for this product, I basically used our classic Glenmorangie, think of original as the base here, and then extra matured it, finished it in very special casks from the island of Madeira that I had specially created for me. So that's how we made Bacalta, and I'm going to speak in more detail when we come to actually do the tasting.
So probably like me, you want to get started on Bacalta right now, but Bill and I both have done many whisky tastings. I think it's a great idea before we try this brand new Glenmorangie to warm up our taste buds. So probably a good idea to do that, Bill, probably with Glenmorangie Original.
Absolutely. It's a great idea for so many reasons, not least the fact that the original is essentially the backbone of the Glenmorangie range, and almost all of the other whiskies in the range start their life off as being Glenmorangie Original. In many respects, it's the classic taste of Glenmorangie, and of course it's extremely personal to me, because many, many years ago when I was a young student, it was the very first whiskey I ever tasted, and it was that which pretty much drew me into the category of malt whiskey. So original, a combination of mineral-rich spring water, distillation in the tallest copper pot stills in Scotland produces this incredibly floral, delicate spirit. It means it's a spirit which matures very quickly. It picks up flavour from the cask very readily. So we have to be extremely careful with our choice of barrels. So we use bespoke, barrels made to our own unique specification using tight-grained, air-seasoned American oak. Of course, we only use the barrels 2 times, and this all comes together to give this unparalleled, soft, creamy, fantastic taste experience.
Well, surely there's no time like the present to taste in.
Yep, sounds good to me. So, ladies and gents, believe it or not, this is the first whiskey Brendan and I have tasted today, and it's now 7 p.m. here in Scotland. Unmistakable due to its lovely, bright golden colour. We are tasting it in our classic Glenmorangie tulip-shaped glasses. So these are the glasses we would use here in the sensory lab. And if you just wave it gently back and forth under your nostrils, you get that lovely perfumed floral bouquet, hints of lemon and honey and vanilla and apricot. It makes you just want to dive into the glass. So without further ado, let's taste it, ladies and gents. The first thing you notice is this incredibly soft texture. Even at full strength, it has this lovely, silky, creamy, buttery texture. Contrasting flavours, you know, a little bit of tangy, bittersweet citrus fruit, but the lovely softness of vanilla, of honey, of peaches. And considering its youthfulness, this is 10 years old. It's got a relatively long aftertaste, and you start to get some gentle spices, hints of ginger, a bit more apricot, and some of the nuttiness from the oak, coconut or almond or something like that. I think I've named about 8 flavours so far. Brendan and I and the team have found no fewer than 140 different flavours in Glenmorangie Original, sort of underscoring its complexity. So it's very well known. I'm sure most of you in the audience have tried this, but this is the backbone of the range, and the next 2 whiskies we're going to try grow out of being Glenmorangie Original.
Fantastic. So probably a sensible whisky to try next, Bill, would probably be Glenmorangie Lasanta, to demonstrate how great this whisky is for extra maturing in different casks. So should we try that?
Absolutely. And you know, way back in the early to mid 1990s, the Glenmorangie company pioneered this technique, now much copied throughout the industry, that we call finishing or extra maturation. And the reason we developed that is we like the flavours in original, but they're very, very delicate, they're very complex, so we don't want to lose them completely. So we then transfer this very same whisky into a range of different cask types. We take a bit of the flavour from the second cask, but we don't lose the essential goodness and complexity, the house character of original. So what we have here is Glenmorangie Lasanta, which uses Spanish sherry casks for the second period. You know, Brendan, you were involved in the development of the new recipe for this, so why don't you tell the audience a bit about Lasanta?
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
So Glenmorangie Lasanta, I started with the Glenmorangie company about 3 years ago, and the recipe was revised. So originally, Glenmorangie Lasanta was Glenmorangie laid down for 10 years in ex-bourbon casks, so American white oak, and then it was given 2 years to finish exclusively in Oloroso sherry casks from Spain. Now this made an incredible whisky, lots of dried fruits, lots of spice, but what we decided was to just look at the recipe and see if there was any way we could enhance some of the depth, some of the density, some of the richness and the chocolate flavours that we wanted to get from the sherry. And the decision was made to still use the Oloroso sherry casks, but also introduce some Pedro Jimenez, a deeper, darker, more raisiny sherry. And the combination really worked, and that became the new Glenmorangie Lasanta recipe.
How did you say that? Pedro Jimenez?
Pedro Jimenez.
That must be the Glasgow way of pronouncing it.
That's definitely, my natural lisp lends me to pronouncing it that way. Hello, anyone from Spain. So if we hold up the glass of Glenmorangie Lasanta, the key really is in the name. Lasanta means, in Old Scottish, it means warmth and passion. So this is a richer, slightly more intense, a deeper expression of Glenmorangie, and it has warming spices and much richer. So another little nose.
I can definitely get that chocolate and all these raisins and spices in there.
Yeah, what I always get, I'm going to take a little sip, but I always get chocolate covered raisins. It's silky, but it has those flavours that really sing out of the glass. But I mean, I'm telling you, your job here, Bill, but what we're trying to do when we finish in sherry is we don't want to consume the whisky that we've already made. After 10 years, we've created the classic Glenmorangie flavours, the citrus, the lightness, the complexity. With the finish of sherry, we don't want to swamp that. We just want to accentuate some of the flavours, make it a little deeper, get that chocolate flavour to come through, and the dried fruits, the raisins, the dates, and some of the spices. But it really is, it's a great example of how to finish a whisky.
I particularly noticed, Brendan, the difference in the texture in the mouth, a bit more viscosity in there with the influence of the sherry cask. And ladies and gents, I think you would probably agree with me here that after as little as 2 years finishing, the sherry casks have had such a big impact in flavour, so that's why we tend to limit the period to typically between 18 and 36 months when we finish.
Yeah, and probably the last thing to say about Lasanta is we've tried it at full strength. It's bottled at 43% ABV. If you prefer your whiskies with water, adding water to this will open it up a little, and I think you'll find much more of the traditional house style of Glenmorangie Original when you add the water. It's a personal taste. I prefer it at full strength because you get that silky texture and it really has the chocolate flavour shining through. So Bill.
Yes, on to the main event, I think.
I think everyone's been patient enough. It's time to learn more about Bacalta.
Okay, ladies and gents, the genesis of this project goes back many, many years. And when I first joined the Glenmorangie company, too many years ago to even remember, got a long history in the company, we had dabbled on and off with casks from the beautiful sun-drenched island of Madeira on the Atlantic Ocean off the north coast of Africa. The challenge with this was, and this will resonate with anyone who's familiar with Madeira wine, it's a tiny industry, and to try and get consistency in terms of the barrels was a big challenge. So, you know, we were probably the first company in Scotland to finish in Madeira casks, but I always felt we could do something a bit more, something a little bit better. So the end result of that quest is here this evening, Glenmorangie Bacalta. So the first thing I would say is that this product is completely bespoke. And what I mean by that is we have controlled every aspect of the production process. So it started off, as it always does, Brendan, with the choice of wood. So I contracted our supplier to source some tight-grained, air-seasoned American oak for me, and they manufactured it into 250-litre hogsheads. Now, normally for a bourbon barrel, it would be given a heavy char in the inside. Didn't want that, too intense in flavour, so the barrels were heavily toasted. The heads went on, and then they were sent out to the island of Madeira. So the second stage was that I chose a particular style of wine, and Malmsey, or Malvasia as it's sometimes known, is the richest, sweetest, most unctuous style of Madeira wine. So these barrels were soaked in Madeira wine for 2 years, and they truly got the goodness of the sunshine. The wine was actually baked inside the cask, and that's what makes Madeira wine so unique. So 2 years in the sun-drenched island of Madeira, and then finally they came back to Glenmorangie Distillery, where we made a selection using mainly first fill American oak bourbon barrels, and they were then finished or extra matured for a further 2 years. And at that stage, Brendan and I decided they had picked up enough flavour from the Madeira barrels, so we decided to bottle it. And that's what we have here, bottled at 46% alcohol by volume, non-chill filtered, of course. So that is the story of Glenmorangie Bacalta.
Fantastic. So, I mean, surely we have to taste it now after that introduction.
Well, hopefully we've whetted people's appetites enough. So ladies and gents, join us for the third glass of Glenmorangie whiskey tonight, Glenmorangie Bacalta. I always like to bottle the private edition at 46% alcohol by volume because we like to have it non-chill filtered, leave all these lovely acetate esters in there, which as well as contributing to the flavour, give this lovely texture to it. Before we experience that, once again, just, you know, gently inhale the bouquet of this whiskey. The first thing I would say is, this is familiar. This is very classically a Glenmorangie whiskey. But if you compare it to your glass of original, it's got a bit of a twist in there. You know, something that's reminding me of baked bread, tangy caramelized citrus fruits, maybe even something slightly minerally in there. Now, ladies and gents, as always, it's up to yourselves whether you want to taste this neat or cut it with a little bit water. Personally, I'm going to just add a few drops of water with my little pipette here, and I'm going to mix it through and leave it to open up a little bit. Now, it depends on which whiskey you're drinking, whether or not it reacts well to water. But with this, I really do recommend, ladies and gents, a few drops of water really opens up the bouquet. And you start to get some of these classic Madeira-type flavours from the baking of the wine. You know, maybe something slightly zesty or sharp, emphasizing the oxidized character of Malmsey Madeira wine. I sometimes describe it, you know, Brendan, like rancio or aged balsamic vinegar.
Absolutely, balsamic vinegar's really in there, yeah.
I know, I'm just getting a little bit more of the woodiness in there, a bit of spiciness. You need to be careful, ladies and gents, that you don't drown the whiskey, and that's why I always carry my trusty pipette with me wherever I go. What do you think, Brendan? Should we taste it now?
Absolutely.
Ladies and gents, can you follow me with this? Start off by taking a small sip just to get your palates used to it. So let's do that to start off with. Now, this is not just simply a Scottish excuse to have 2 drinks of the whiskey. Seriously, it's just to get your palate ready to the onslaught of flavours. So once you've done that, let's try a more generous sip and really think about the texture and the flavour of Bacalta. The first thing I would say is you get that largesse of flavour. It's big, it's rounded. The non-chill filtration gives you that big viscosity in the mouth, you know, almost syrupy in there. There's a lovely burst again of these tangy citrus fruits, almost like orange and grapefruit marmalade in there. Something slightly in the background, you know, it's not burnt, it's not smoky, but there's that lovely caramelized flavour in there. And if I close my eyes, it transports me right back to the island of Madeira. I've been there many, many times, ladies and gents, over the years, both on vacation and to source barrels. So I'm used to that tangy, slightly curious flavour you get from these wonderful wines. Once that goes down, again, there's a combination of flavours. There's some classic Glenmorangie flavours in there, something slightly buttery, a hint of mint toffee in there, something like baked bread. And then in the aftertaste, again, there's something that I tend to associate with older whiskies, more mature whiskies. You know, it's like menthol or eucalyptus or something like that. What do you find in there, Brendan?
You've really, the biggest thing I find it has some big changes from original and some more subtle ones. It's absolutely citrus, but it's orange marmalade is the biggest thing that sings out for me. Not just the way it tastes, but that silky, slightly thicker texture. And I think you said it's a little syrupy. And what I also love is if now that the glass is opened up, you've added water, is you really pick up the Madeira notes. The Madeira grows as the whiskey is left in the glass.
Now, for our audience here tonight, if any of you didn't quite find the difference, if you have any of your original left in your glass, if you actually compare and contrast the two now, the original is delicate, floral, zesty, whereas the Bacalta definitely has this rich, tangy sensation going to it. You know what, Brendan? I think I need a third taste of this to really characterise it.
I have a feeling you would say that.
You know, it's now like honey, it's like mead, it's like golden syrup pudding. It's just so rich and so unctuous.
So a little bit more about Madeira. What made you use Madeira casks? Is this your first time using Madeira casks?
It's not, Brendan. I have tested them on and off before, and one of the main reasons for this project was that I'm so utterly fascinated by Madeira wine. It's just such a curious, challenging wine. I think it's a very misunderstood wine, and historically the reasons the wines had this lovely bait character was that they were originally used as ballast in the hold of ships, which circumnavigated the globe, and as they crossed the equator, they got baked. So nowadays, in the vineyards of Madeira, they recreate that by storing the barrels up in the roof space of the vineyards, and that's where our hogshead-sized barrels were stored. And I just wanted to try and make the most perfect Madeira finished whiskey I could do.
Well, I'm biased, but absolutely, I think you've managed that. It really is just opening up more and more of those burnt and baked notes coming through.
And again, ladies and gents, it's something I would draw your attention to, that you might not necessarily find all of the flavours first time round. But if you leave your glasses in front of you, leave them to open up to the oxygen, and then go back, you get that most distinct separation in flavours. So original, floral, zesty, perfumed, Lasanta, rich, spicy, chocolatey, oily, and then Madeira, this lovely, tangy, curious thing, which to me just encapsulates the goodness of sunshine in a glass. So that's the story behind Glenmorangie Bacalta, which is private edition number 8.
Fantastic. Well, I hope everyone out there across Europe is enjoying this as much as we are here. So I think probably this is as good a time as any to open this up to questions. So probably if we start with London first, if there's any questions in London for Bill on Bacalta.
Hello, London. Can you hear us?
Hi. Can I just comment on the fact that I found your presentation really, really slick, professional, enthusiastic, and passionate, and that was great to see. And clearly, from the presentation, there was the distinctions you made between the 3 different expressions was very, very clear, and certainly led me, I can only speak personally, to a kind of a crescendo in terms of being in favour of the Bacalta. In terms of rolling this out, so this might seem like the hard end of the process, in terms of rolling it out, in terms of the price point, I mean, where do you pitch something like this in terms of price point, so that enough people can get access to it and experience it, and so on and so forth?
No, thank you first of all for your comments about our slick presentation. I was going to say you'd always think we've done this before. Yeah, in terms of the price point, the whole idea of the private edition range is to showcase a degree of experimentation, something slightly different, something slightly innovative that we wouldn't necessarily have in the core range. By the very nature of these products, they are very limited, and they do tend to sell out fairly quickly, so they're quite appealing to collectors and connoisseur drinkers. But you the price point of the core range, the original, the Lasanta, the Quintaruba, and the Nectar d'Or. So we typically will be positioning it at a price slightly above that to reflect what's gone into it in the creation process and the rarity of the whiskies.
Good evening, gents. This is London calling. I just wondered if you tried any of the other types of Madeira cask. Obviously, there's various different types of Madeira, from dry to sweet. Did you try or consider them and do a few little experiments and see how they tasted as well?
Yeah, absolutely. Over many years, the most indigenous and easily available Madeira wines are made with a great variety called Tinta Negra Mole, which makes what I would somewhat tongue-in-cheek referred to as a very good cooking wine. But if you're really serious about Madeira wines, you use the 4 noble grape varieties: Cercial, which is very, very dry; Verdilio, which is medium dry; Bual, which is medium sweet; and Malmsey, which is very, very sweet. So yes, I tried each of these, but the one that I kept coming back to was Malmsey, because I thought the richness of the wine beautifully enhanced the flavour of Glenmorangie. The 2 dry ones, Cercial and Verdilio, were just a little bit too severe, but Bual and Malmsey were the ones that really worked. But what I would emphasise here is, I can't simply just go to Madeira and buy barrels with these wines. That's why this whole process started off about 7 or 8 years ago, and I had to metaphorically get into bed with a Madeira producer to allow us to use their wines to season the barrels. So it was very much a labour of love.
And that was just metaphorically, just to confirm.
I can't answer that question, Brendan. Next.
Do you have pictures of it?
Any more questions from London?
No, I think we're fine. Thank you.
No, they were great questions, so thank you. So, London, thank you. We'll head over to Munich now. Munich, do you have any questions for Bill on Glenmorangie Bacalta?
Hello, so this is Munich.
Hello, Munich.
We have a question here from Oliver.
Hello, gentlemen. Thanks for your presentation. It was marvelous, very entertaining. I got one question, because if you know the core range, they all have, well, except for the original, all have the same aging, about, it's like 10 years plus 2. How is it with the Bacalta? Is it the same than the others are?
Yeah, you know, it's a very good and very obvious question, Oliver, so thank you for asking it. Our strategy has been not to age the private edition range because we were trying to emphasize the way in which the whiskies were created. But I think Brendan and I gave some very, very big clues during our presentation. But yeah, essentially think of original and think of 2 years finishing in the barrels. So yeah, they're very much in the same bracket as the extra matured range. And you know, again, to add to that, I mean, the most important thing for Brendan and I was making sure we didn't leave the base whiskey in the Madeira casks for too long. And again, sometimes when you start these projects, you think, oh, I'm going to leave it in the Madeira barrels for 4 or 5 years. But after 2 years, we felt it was just enough. We didn't want to lose the balance in flavour terms in the whiskey.
Okay, so I think someone else is just getting ready to ask a question.
Yeah, hello. I just wanted to ask, how often do you check the cask before you say, okay, it's okay and you can finish it?
Yeah, again, very, very good question. And if we're talking for a product like Glenmorangie Original, where we're filling tens of thousands of casks each year, you know, we tend to sample a representative proportion of the cask throughout its lifetime. But if it's something like the private edition range, where we are dealing with a much smaller volume, typically myself, Brendan, and the team will sample every single cask probably on a quarterly basis. So almost every 3 months, we're drawing samples from the barrels. It makes us a little bit unpopular with the warehousing team at Glenmorangie Distillery, but for products like this, it absolutely has to be done. So almost every 3 months we're tasting. And you know, that comes from years of experience where I've sometimes left whiskies in wine barrels a little bit longer than I would necessarily have liked to do. So nowadays we are sampling all the time. And that's one of the things we do here in the sensory lab. We've literally got hundreds of samples to taste on a typical month. So about every 3 months is the answer to your question.
Yeah. The one thing I would add is, as we get closer to when we think this whiskey is just about ready, the frequency can go up to every week, you know, sampling. And we also check every single litre of spirit that comes out of the distillery before it goes into casks. So we really do check everything.
And it's a wonderful way of working because it means Brendan and I are able to avoid lots of meetings we wouldn't necessarily want to go to because we're tasting here in the lab.
So, do we have any more questions? Yes. Yeah, I think someone else is asking a question in Munich.
Are we allowed to? Oh, I should ask you for the edition, how much bottles you did in total for the world market. Second, my question is, I'm Heinrich from the Whisky Botschaft in Germany, and I want to, Brendan Heiler, I met 2 years ago, so I want to ask about the blending. How different had been the cask you made, and how was the blending what you did? Or different types of flavors from different casks that you have?
Yeah. Do you want me to?
Please, Bill.
Yes. It's interesting, and I'm comparing and contrasting this product with last year's private edition Milchen, where we had huge differences in flavour. And Brendan and I spent a lot of time on that product, and we actually only selected about 50% of the barrels that went for bottling. But with Bacalta, it was much more consistent than that. And I think the reason for that was probably because the barrels were made very much to our own unique specification. So I had complete control over every stage of the process. So for the private edition range, this has been arguably the most consistent of all the ones we did. So basically, we could happily have selected all of the barrels there and put them into the final blend for bottling. To try and answer your original question, I'm not good with numbers, so I can't quite remember, but we're talking a few thousand cases globally here, so it's extremely limited. You know, something like 1 or 2% of the total volume of the Glenmorangie brand is available each year in the form of the private edition. So, you know, ladies and gents, I always say this, but if you enjoyed this, get yourself a bottle while you can.
Okay, so yeah, I think we have another question.
Yes, hi, this is Margaret Marie. My question is, does it make any difference where inside the warehouse the barrel is stored? Where exactly? Does it make a difference whether the barrel is closer to the walls or whether it's closer to the inside or more in the upper rows or more closer to the ground? Or does it not make a difference at all?
Well, if I answer one, we do lots of tests. We have so many casks, but we even find there's just so many variables when whiskey is maturing in casks that even 2 10-year-old casks that are going to become Glenmorangie Original, filled with the same spirit, made on the same day, filled into casks made from the same tree on the same day, and sat side by side in the exact same part of the warehouse. Even these 2 casks will be different, not black and white, but there will be subtle differences in variation in every single cask that we have. So it's really difficult to tell that this is the perfect place to put a sherry cask, this is the perfect place to put an ex-bourbon cask, this is the perfect place to put a cask for a very long time. So I find that there's just so much uniqueness and variation in the casks that it's almost impossible to tell. The best thing when we're making these products, I find, is to put them somewhere where we're able to sample them often and easily. And that way we can really keep our eyes on how this whiskey is developing. So I don't know if, Bill, you're going to completely disagree with me or not, but...
Not completely, no, but if I can just add to that, I mean, Brendan touched on a very interesting point there, that for 2 reasons, for the private edition range, we will always store the cask in old-fashioned dunnage warehouses. Firstly, in these type of warehouses, they tend to be cooler and damper, and it helps develop a lot of fragrance in the barrels. So I think that's quite important. But also we need access to them because we're sampling them so regularly. So there's no question. I agree with what Brendan said, that you will get variation